Welcome to Bring Your Own Disaster. Today we're going to look at help managing the challenges of change.
Hello, everybody. I'd like to thank everybody for attending today. This is Jeff Main, the CEO of QuestTech. We got a couple quick items before we get started. We'll probably have some people jumping on late because it is after lunch. Two quick items. Our webinar this afternoon is provided by QuestTech. We're in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for some of those that are out of state. We have been successfully delivering technology management services in K-12 for over 30 years. And our services range from technology assessments all the way to complete technology outsourcing. So why is this webinar called Bring Your Own Disaster? Definitely not the normal title. And why did we select BYOD as one of our thought leader topics? Well, first of all, our 30 years experience in K-12, we've seen many trends and concepts come and go. BYOD is the latest one, along with many others. Second, these trends and concepts are usually handed directly to the IT department to design and implement with minimal understanding of the educational impact. And that's kind of why we call it BYOD, Bring Your Own Disaster, because the idea is really about the consumerization of IT. It's not all about just bringing a device from home. The increased pressure to allow the consumer device to work in an enterprise network. And what that means is schools have been designed the same way for the last 30 years to control the device that's being delivered. It's being delivered on. Today, it's any device, anywhere, anytime, and that makes things much tougher on IT. So BYOD is the tip of the iceberg, as this graphic shows. And our webinar today aims to help you understand what's really under the surface and what's really involved in this piece. We have some fantastic resources lined up today, some great people. Before we get started, I just want to give a quick shout out to Bruce Downing and Kylie Urs, who put this whole thing together, and they did a wonderful job. So we'll go into real quick who's on our list today for this webinar. Norton, you want to advance that?
I did advance it, Jeff. Don't you see the webinar panelists?
No. I was waiting for it. I didn't see it on my end. Okay. Well, real quick, I'll go into the panelists. First, we have Norton Gusky. He's a consultant and our assessment architect at QuestTech. And he's been with us for a few years. We have Mr. Mike Graham, who's the Director of Technology for Hempfield School District. He actually has a BYOD implementation in place. And he's going to talk a bit about some of the things that he's experienced and some of the suggestions for all of our other schools. And myself, Jeff Main, the CEO of QuestTech. And we have Kylie, who will be helping us along with some of the polls. We're going to take 3 polls today, real quick. They'll be interactive and they'll work directly with you, and then we'll give you the results when we're done. So let's get going. Let's turn it over to Norton.
Normally, when you go to a presentation like this, it's about technology. And what's different today is we really want to be talking about teaching and learning. When you normally hear our success stories, you don't hear what's below the surface of that iceberg. That bringing your own device or bringing your own technology requires planning, requires risk-taking. You have to try to do things you may not be used to doing, things that are going to force you to be rethinking some of your processes, some of your content, the way that learning and teaching happens in your school or school district. You often hear that bringing your own device or technology will save you money, but you don't always hear what you have to invest in. And one of the key things you have to invest in is your infrastructure, especially your wireless infrastructure. And you normally hear just one vendor's point of view. Today, we're not going to talk about any products. We're not going to talk about proprietary solutions. We're really going to be talking about processes, things that you need to understand, things that you want to be able to do if you're going to be moving in this direction. And we want to really focus on that teaching and learning and how technology can support it. We're going to take a quick poll, and Jeff, do you want to explain?
Yeah, so this is going to be an interactive poll. It's going to be on just a little bit, a quick one on who's joining us today. We'll be able to see what we have. So if you want to go ahead and click, the poll is open. We'll leave it open for about 20 seconds here, and we should see the results right away. Looks like we got about 62% voted, so anybody that's on here, if you can, just click right on the selection and we'll be done. Okay, well, we're about 70%. We'll give it a couple more seconds, and Kylie, you can go ahead and show us the results, and we'll move on with Norton. Okay, we should be good. Go ahead.
So what do we have? It's really great to see that we have a large number of district and school administrators joining us, and then the rest are basically technology directors. Good groups to be talking about bringing your own device, bring your own technology. And just some things to understand in terms of what are we really talking about. But before I do that, let me just explain as we go through this presentation today, we're going to try to explore what's under that surface, what's under the iceberg. We're going to ask you a number of questions, and at the end, we're going to provide you a 10-step game plan for you to use, something that will be then sent to you and shared with you. You'll also have a chance to ask your questions in the chat window. So please, as we do that today, if you have questions that come up, enter them, and then we'll try to address those at the very end of the presentation. So your slide you're looking at, you're now seeing basically a Wordle that has some key ideas, some key terms. When we think about bringing your own device or bringing your own technology, are we just talking about laptops? Are we talking about mobile devices? Does it include netbooks, e-readers? It really depends on how you define what you're going to be doing for your school district. You can be doing all mobile devices, or you may decide you only want to focus on a particular area. The key thing is that you have to be thinking in terms of a plan, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. When we think about bringing your own device, it's not that it's just one set of solutions. There's a spectrum. And to help us today, we're going to have Mike Graham join us from Hempfield in the eastern part of Pennsylvania. And what we're going to do is hear from Mike where he started and how Hempfield has grown and the changes in the 3 years that he's been implementing a BYOD plan for the Hempfield School District. So Mike, could you tell us a little bit in terms of where you started and where you're at today?
Sure, Norton. I actually just shared a link out with you. I think if you could send that out to the group, it's actually a Wikispaces site where we have a lot of this documented, but I'll certainly talk through it here for those that don't have access to it.
Yeah, we'll have that in the chat window, so just so you know, okay. Mike, we already have that for people to share, so we thank you.
Okay.
They'll have that then to be able to reference.
Okay. We started back in the fall of 2009, and at the time, the tech department was looking at providing guest access to the internet, not just for students, but for presenters and other groups that were coming into the school. And at the same time, our high school principal team was looking at revamping the way their personal device, cell phone policies and everything worked with students, because they were dealing with a lot of discipline issues that were really revolving around some policies that really didn't make any sense anymore, since pretty much every student is bringing a cell phone. And we basically sat down with the principal team and kind of talked through what we were thinking of in terms of guest access to the network, and what they were thinking of in terms of how to allow students to use these devices that they were bringing to school all the time. And these in our two groups basically came up with a plan to slowly roll out guest internet access. Tech department would take care of the network piece, and the principal team would take care of kind of the discipline side, the student handbook, and dealing with it at that level, as opposed to the tech department doing everything. So we began with a pilot group in our library, which is a fairly good size. Our high school is about 2,200 kids. And so we rolled out a guest network in the library. Students, if they were in there during study halls, if they came in after school, they could hop on the network, the guest network, and basically browse the web, access some limited school resources, not everything internally, but some limited resources. Around the same time that we were kind of planning to roll this out, we were also performing a very significant upgrade to our wireless network, moving from the little standard home access points to a real enterprise wireless setup where you have built-in security, Active Directory authentication, all those features that you really need to have in place before you move forward with a BYOD implementation. The pilot in the library was very successful. Students were able to bring in their own devices, hop on, do research. We didn't really run into any issues there. While the pilot was going on, we were also meeting with faculty, kind of talking through what the plan was, whether this was a full-blown replacement for CFF devices, what the long-term strategy was. And in some of those initial meetings with the principals and the district administration, we pretty much recognized off the fact that this wasn't going to be a replacement for CFF, at least in the short term, the next 3 to 5 years. And this is back in 2009, just because we knew that while there were a high percentage of students with devices, there were going to be a lot of hesitation to really get in there and use devices, not just among the students, but also among the faculty as well. So we kind of went into this knowing that if we did open it up to the entire school, it was really going to be just sort of an experiment to see how students use the network in place, and what other discipline issues, what other technology issues would come up if we rolled it out wide scale. We didn't right off the bat plan for it to be heavily used for instruction, and I'm actually really glad that we went that route, because it really lowered the responsibilities and needs that would be placed on the tech department. If you roll something out and everyone's expecting to use it for instruction, that's something that's got to be there every single day. The way we rolled it out, after the pilot was over and we had soothed some fears amongst the high school staff, we fired up the guest network across the entire building at the beginning of the 2010-2011 school year. And everything went pretty well. We sent a couple letters home to parents, which you can find on that wiki there as well. And then the following year, we opened up access to the middle school. And from there, we haven't had too many problems. I can talk a little bit more about the security. I think that's coming up later in the webinar.
Yep, that's right.
But in general, we try to design a self-policing system, so to speak, that really didn't rely too heavily on the tech department to manage, and that really it fell back to the classroom teachers and the principals to manage the appropriate uses when there was a question.
Well, that's a great story, and it really falls right into what we're going to be sharing today. I think it's important for people to realize how you started with a pilot. You started small, you built from that, you used your guest access, you tested things out, you gained a lot of knowledge and experience, and then you also put that infrastructure in place. And we'll really highlight some of those as we go along, Mike. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow people to let us know where they are, so we have a better sense in terms of our audience, in terms of where are they along that spectrum. We have a second poll that's going to come up. And if people would basically look at in their poll area, there should be in terms of where you're at. So you have choices of not on the chart, limited access, basic, enhanced, or advanced. So we'll give people about a minute. And Jeff, if you want to add anything, I'm going to basically then continue after the polling.
Okay, Norton. We got about 33% voted right now, 42%. Give it a couple more seconds here. %67 voted right now, so that's about where we were last time. Give it a couple more seconds. It looks like yeah, a little bit of everybody across the board. Go ahead, Kylie. Oh, there we go. I think we're good.
So it looks like we have clusters with the largest really towards the middle and going towards from basic to limited to not on the chart, with about 11% of our people who are really advanced. So that really fits in terms of our perspective, but we'll try to see if we can add some things for those people who are advanced. And Mike hopefully will then address maybe some of those kinds of things as we move forward, because I think we want to make sure that we make this worthwhile for everyone. So what we're going to do is we're going to now switch a little bit and start thinking about why we would go for a bring your own device. And then we're going to then look at why you might not want to go. One of the keys from my point of view is really about preparing students. One of the things that I started using going back actually before the beginning of the 21st century was something that the Partnership for 21st Century Skills had developed. And you can really summarize and use what are called the 4 C's to know what that is. And those are what you're looking at right now. So when you're thinking about bringing your own device, how are you really impacting students' ability to think critically, to communicate at a higher level, to collaborate with other students, with other opportunities with mentors and people that might be in other places? And what kind of opportunities are you giving kids to be creative? It's also about connected learning. We want to be able to have access anytime, anywhere. And what we want to basically think about is, by doing that, there are things that we have to be thinking that make that happen, as Mike was talking to you about. I began when I was the Coordinator of Educational Technology for the Fox Chapel Area School District going back about 10 years ago, looking at what was going on in business, looking at in hospitals, looking at in colleges, and wanted to be able to make that happen so that students in the Fox Chapel Area School District had access anytime, anywhere. And we didn't start with the BYOD or BYT at that time because no one was really thinking quite about that. But we did start making the necessary changes in the infrastructure so that connected learning could happen. A few facts just to help you put this in perspective. These are brought to you by COSIN. And if you're not familiar with COSIN, it's the Consortium for School Networking. It's a great organization that really tries to address the issues of technology for educational leaders, educational technology leaders, whether it be administrators like we have today, or whether it be a technology director, the other group that we have today. What jumps out at me when I looked at this the first time is that 64% of the parents would purchase a mobile device. So when you think about the issue in terms of, are you going to be able to provide devices? When you have parents who are willing to put up money, can you create a partnership with your parents? Something for you to think about. When you think about the kids themselves, are they ready to use their own devices? And if you haven't used the Project Tomorrow with the Speak Up survey, I really recommend that you take a look and look up Julie Evans, and we'll provide a link for you, I hope, so that you'll be able to follow up with this. But the key thing is that your students want to be using their devices. So it's your opportunity to get that engagement, use their motivation. But there is an issue that ISICA has brought up in terms of security, and we're going to try to talk about that as well. So let's move forward. When we were talking about those 21st century skills, one of the things that's really critical from my point of view is empowering your students. We had a round table that QuestTech put together, and one of the participants was Sean McDonough, the Chief Technology Director at the Allegheny Intermediate Unit here in Pittsburgh. Sean really highlighted the importance of empowering students as part of that roundtable. And we're going to provide a link for you to look at the video snippet that really brings that together. So if you're interested in knowing more about what Sean was saying and how this can empower students, you'll have a chance. You can go offline. And we're also going to be capturing all this so you have all this available. But the key thing is that you want your students to be making choices, feeling a sense of ownership. When you empower the students and they have their own devices, what the research has shown is that students do not do anything to those devices. It's because it's theirs. It's kind of like if you own a house versus you rent a house. If you give kids the power to use their own technology, they have a sense of ownership. They don't pull the keys off. They don't do the things that create havoc. They're empowered. They own it. That's important to really think about. Then there's the challenge of cyber school. Two of the other people who had joined us at the roundtable were Dr. DeSanti and Dr. Dean Casello. And they brought up key issues in terms of the cost and the money that's been diverted to cyber schools. And if you think about what's part of the appeal of cyber school is that you're building your own school, you're making your own choices, you have your own device. So what if you give students the ability to have their own device in your brick and mortar school? You're now giving them a reason to stay in your school, giving them choices, giving them things to do, and especially if you follow those 4 C's. They're now engaged, they're interactive, they're creating, they're building, they're making. There's not a reason for them to be going and leaving you. So that becomes really a challenge that you could be addressing. There's always the cost of funding technology. You heard what Mike said in terms of with Hempfield, that they thought about in terms of, would this be replacing their classroom for the future laptops? You need to be thinking about, yes, you can be going that route, but are you going to be able to go that route initially? Are you really going to be able to fund, and what about the cost that you haven't thought about? So you're going to have to be weighing that. There is a cost that you can save, but you have to think about what that means. Now, what about the other side? Are there reasons why you might not want to think about going this direction? Especially those people who haven't taken this first step. Have you thought about the safety and security risks? And what we're going to do is we're going to go back to Mike Graham and to find out what really happened at Hempfield. Were there these issues? Or were these just things that people bring up that they always fear but really didn't happen? Mike, are you there to continue?
Yep, I'm still here.
Good.
Like I mentioned before, we talked with the principals quite a bit, and they had their own set of concerns about how, students would be using the network, and really pointed out to us that there were going to be a lot of concerns amongst the faculty. And so we definitely made a point of scheduling a number of just kind of info sessions. I forget what we call them, forums, I think, where we just set up a time after school and faculty from the building could come in and basically share any concerns that they had with us about, whether, the kids would be wasting their time all day on Twitter. They asked some very good questions about security, even real simple things like, was there going to be enough power in the room for kids to charge their devices if they brought them in? And we took it upon ourselves to address, all these questions that had come up. Some were legitimate concerns, some were not necessarily things we had to worry about, like the power issue, but it did give us a lot of very meaningful data, and the wiki actually has some of the notes from one of those faculty forums. So after everything got up and running for the guest network, we did intentionally design it so that the students would not have direct access to any of the district resources aside from our website and Moodle server and the public or the portal where we use to access our student information system and gradebook. Those were the only real internal servers that they could access. There were a lot of concerns from the faculty about viruses spreading, and we definitely reassured them quite a few times that the student devices that were coming in were on a completely separate network, and that the student devices couldn't interact in any way with what was going on in the school. Now, one of the concerns that I've heard from other districts that comes up from time to time is whether you allow the student devices to access things like file servers and printers and other resources that you typically see in a computer lab setting. We're a little bit fortunate in that we had transitioned to Google Docs or Google Apps probably a year or two prior to when we started talking about all this, the BYOD implementations. So at the time we were rolling into this, there really access to student file shares and things like that is really on a decline to the point that we're even debating getting rid of them entirely sometime in the next year or so here, because quite frankly students don't really use them anymore. They're using things like Google Drive and Dropbox and everything like that to move their work back and forth. So in that regard, file server access wasn't too big. And for that matter, printing really wasn't either, since a lot of students were submitting things electronically to Moodle or emailing teachers, so printing wasn't an issue. I mentioned earlier we wanted to build the network to be very self-sufficient. We kind of designed our content filter, or utilized some features in our content filter that we don't have turned on our other networks. We set it up so that in addition to just the standard filtering, we put on a lockout feature, so that if a student hits a particular category that we wanted blocked too many times, it actually locks their IP address for a period of time. I believe it's 10 to 15 minutes, and doesn't let them go anywhere at all. So in many ways, that's kind of been a deterrent for someone, to sit there and mess around trying to find sites that the filter doesn't block. And in many ways, that's really cut down on the amount of investigation time that we've had to put into to tracking, when students are doing something bad on the network. The first, month or two that system was in place, we had lots of hits going on, and we just kind of let them go at that point. And sure enough, after a month or so, when students realized that they'd be kicked off the network automatically for 10 minutes, a lot of those hits on things like Facebook and Twitter and everything, all that kind of backed off, and it settled down into just mainly academic use of the network.
Well, that's really great to hear, and I think for our audience, especially those who are still not on the chart or have limited access, haven't gone as far as you have, and realizing those aren't really issues. And I think the points you brought up are really important in terms of file server printing, because if you're really going this route, you're really moving into a digital environment, and it's a larger issue. You need to be thinking about that. And so let's just look at a few of the other issues in terms of why not BYOD. And Mike, if you want to jump in at any time, please do that. You had mentioned about the virus issue or the anti-malware, and we really didn't have a problem about that. What about managing those mobile devices? Did you have to buy different software in order to make that happen?
We did not. We kind of made a conscious decision early in the process that we were not going to enforce registration to get on the network. We wanted to encourage students to get on as much as possible. So we pretty much let any device on that had a web browser. You needed an Active Directory username and password, which all of our students have. But that's all it took to get on the network. We made it very clear that this network was separate from Hempfield, and that students were pretty much on their own. They were responsible for putting on antivirus and securing their machines much the same way if they went to a Starbucks or something, a public Wi-Fi hotspot.
Really good. And you had already mentioned that you had done a major upgrade of your network. And I think that really is the key, that if anyone is trying to go this route and that they haven't upgraded their network, they have to sit down and think about that. Because as you said, you really had to have an enterprise-wide solution. Yeah,
the wireless system we're using it's pretty much an open network. It's very similar to what you would get in a hotel, where after you connect to that open network, you're greeted with a web browser login screen that you have to put in a username and password before you can get anywhere. So that's restricted access to students. It also makes it very, very convenient to track which student has what IP address, their MAC address. All that information can get cross-referenced with the filter, so it's very, very easy to track down exactly what student is doing what on the network. It makes it very, very easy.
Gary Steger is going to be the keynote speaker at this year's Three Rivers Educational Technology Conference, which is going to be on November 14th for those of you who haven't registered yet and might be interested. And Gary really is concerned about equity issues, because not all students can afford to have devices that they bring in. And if they bring in their device, they're not all of the same ability or capability. They can't run all the same applications, the things that a teacher might want. And therefore, that limits learning. Mike, did you see that as an issue in terms of what happened at Hempfield?
It was discussed, particularly amongst the teachers that were there when the ideas of how this was going to be used were still kind of forming. Because we initially just we were going to put the network up there and let it be used, however students or teachers saw fit. Equity wasn't a huge issue at the time because we weren't requiring its use for anything. And as time went on, we found that teachers who really wanted to use it kind of came up with some creative uses to get around the issue, not just of equity, but of the fact that students may not be bringing their cell phone or their, a laptop or whatever device they may have to school every single day, depending on what their schedule's like, who brought them, when they'd be able to have it there. So a lot of our teachers that did make use of the network purposely at the start of the school year kind of took an inventory of their class and said, what devices do you have? What are its capabilities, things like that. Are you going to be able to bring it every single day? And after they had that information, they were able to kind of plan ahead. And so that rather than every kid in the class having to have a device there to participate, they would actually break the students up into groups and make sure that at least one student in every single group had a device. That way there wasn't a whole lot of calling somebody out for not having a device, or it didn't get into issues of so-and-so has a better device than mine. It made it a little bit easier to work in groups and share the devices actually for the teachers that were implementing it.
Good, and I'm going to highlight a little bit about that as we get further along down the road, because to me, we talk about collaboration. Here's a great opportunity when you realize maybe not everyone has, but why not work in groups, just as you said, Mike. But there's also this issue in terms of digital content. And you have to be thinking about, it's not just the device, it's what are you doing with the device? What are you trying to do in terms of your teaching and the learning that's going on? How are you going to be using these devices? What are you going to be accessing? Do you have to be paying for those resources? There's some great resources that are available through, for instance, the Open Education resource that you can be getting. You may have vendors that you're working with, like Discovery Education or Pearson or Mifflin. There also are things that, for instance, that Verizon Thinkfinity has available that you can be accessing. So you have to be thinking about not only what am I going to be using, but how am I going to be using that? What kind of content? And how are you going to be training your teachers? You mentioned, Mike, that you basically talked a lot with the teachers. Did you have to do any separate trainings so that they were then able to adjust to letting the devices come into the classroom?
One of the key pieces that we laid out to the teachers when we started this program, and this still continues to this day, is that the use of the devices in the classroom is always at the discretion of the teacher. That means if they get to a point where they're not comfortable with students using devices, or they're not, they don't feel that it's pertinent to the assignment or what they're working on at the time, they can always say, students, you have to put the devices away. And that really eased a lot of fears that, the kids were going to be running around crazy with all their devices. So in that regard, it eased a lot of fears with the staff. And then for the the staff members that really wanted to utilize it, we did do a number of sessions, both optional after school and optional sessions during our dedicated tech staff development times that we do twice a year towards the beginning of the school year. We did do some very specific staff development sessions related to the use of cell phones, personal devices within the classroom, and that's kind of how we've been growing the program very slowly. It hasn't been a concerted effort to force it everywhere in the building at this time.
And I think one of the most important things that people forget about, and it sounds like that you've brought that into your process, is that you need to have the buy-in from your parents and your board, because there are going to be changes in policies. There are going to be issues that come up that parents are going to be asking. And so you may want to think about, how do you address those? You may want to have a curriculum night. You might want to think about in terms of the kinds of partnership. We have here some examples from eSchool News. And how did you bring on board your board, Mike?
Well, we're very lucky to have an extremely supportive board in terms of how they support the administration, both the district administration and the high school administration. And so when it came time to do the pilot group, it was really the principals in the tech department presenting this to the district administration and saying, we want to move forward with this. We think it's a good thing to do. When the pilot results were very good, taking these results back to our board was relatively easy, to present that we're not going to be dramatically changing the landscape. We're still leaving the power in the teacher's hands to say when and where the devices can be used, and that really settled a lot of fears as to how everything would play out. But like I said, we were very blessed with a understanding board and forward-looking board in terms of how they see technology and education changing.
And we're going to now turn to a poll. And Jeff, do you want to explain, so give our audience a chance to be a little more interactive, and what are they going to do next?
Yep, so go ahead, we're going to go with poll number 3. Quick yes, no, so we should be able to get through this one real quick. Answering our district has or had a specific plan designed to get parent and board buy-in from BYOD initiatives. So right now, it's a quick one, we're at 54%. %. Anybody else out there listening, get your vote in. We're going to close it here in about 5 seconds. 69%. Okay, Kylie, go ahead. I think we're good. Okay, Norton, so you got about 78% with no and about 22% with yes at this point.
So it looks like a lot of people don't have a plan in place. And so we're hoping that the next part of this will give you a sense in terms of what that plan could be. Here are some of the things you may want to start thinking about. Start with that buy-in. Thinking about in terms of how do you get your teachers, just like what Mike was talking about, listening to your teachers, trying to understand what their concerns are. Talking with the students in terms of what do they want to be able to do, and how are they going to be using those devices. Talking with the parents so that you're alleviating some of those fears. Making sure that your building administrators, your district administrators are on board, and getting your school board, making sure that they're going to understand what this is about. What are you going to do next then? What you may want to do is look at, in terms of a district like Hempfield, we're sharing with you some examples of different school districts of different sizes who have taken initiatives in this direction. We'll also include links for you, URLs for each of these. But Hempfield's here in terms of medium-sized school district. But if you're a smaller school district, Plum Borough here in Western Pennsylvania has had an implementation. You may want to look at that. If you're a larger district and you want to be thinking in terms of Forsyth County, Georgia, they're dealing with hundreds of thousands. What are we trying to do? How did they handle that? And we'll be able to share information from Bailey Mitchell. We have some of the examples that he's been able to share, and basically talking the same kind of story that Mike has, because that's the way you want to start. And we'll talk a little bit more in terms of by starting small, moving forward, testing and getting things so that they work the way you want. But every state has a success story, every place you go, and you want to basically then tap into that. You also want to be thinking about key questions. You want to think about from the teacher's point of view, because you really need to think that this is going to change the role of the teacher when you move to a bring your own device or bring your own technology. The teachers are going to have to feel secure, and as Mike talked about, you can empower the teachers by letting them have the choice. They can decide when the students are using those devices, when they're not. The teacher can say, today we're not using your device, please put them away. You want to put that up front so that the teacher has that ability so that they'll buy into this process. You also want to think about the students. How are they going to be using this not only inside the class, but to be able to tap into things outside the class? You heard Mike talk about Google Docs, Google Apps. You may want to be thinking about in terms of how are you going to have the ability for students to access files, to access applications in school, out of school. You may want to use something like Dropbox, so it doesn't matter what device they're using. It could be a mobile device, it could be a phone, it could be a laptop. It doesn't matter. They have access to the same files, the same information from every device. You also want to think about the rigor of the activities. We all know that the Common Core standards are going to force schools to think more about depth of knowledge. So you want to need and work with your teachers to develop better questioning techniques. You want them to be thinking about those 4 C's. You want to do what Mike did in terms of having them talk with their students and think about in terms of the ways that they're going to be using that so that the kids are going to be moving on to those higher levels. You also want to think about a time for learning. How are these devices going to make a difference? You want to be able to make sure that you're doing this for that teaching and learning reasons. It's not just to save money. It's really to change the dynamics and what's going on in your classrooms. Then you have to think about digital citizenship. You want to be thinking about in terms of what are the expectations for students. We're sharing with you here a diagram that was put together by an organization that we're going to give you the link that basically looks at all these different areas. And if you want to know more about what's involved with each of these, you can then follow the link that we'll have up on the screen. But somewhere in your curriculum, you want to be thinking about digital citizenship. I'm working with the Mars Area School District, and they've embedded that as part of their middle school program. You want to have that an active part, but you also want to be having that happen at the elementary, your middle, and your high school. And if you're receiving E-rate funds, you really do need to have a plan K through 12. So it's important that you think about that and roll in the BYOD as part of what you may already be doing, but make sure that you're addressing that. You want to think about your policies and your procedures. It's no longer about just acceptable use, it's now responsible use. We want to empower the students and the staff. We want them to be able to make the choices and know what's expected, and they have to live with that. I think Mike's example in terms of how they were able to create basically that lockout is a good example where the kids, after they tried things, they became responsible. They then saw was an academic tool. They had their chance to try to test out the system, but then they realized it was more important to connect and use it to be productive. You want to think about these other areas in terms of backing up that data. As we said, you don't have to be backing up the data if you move to the cloud. So you may want to be thinking at the same time, if you're going to be moving towards a BYOD, is this going to be the time to think about another way of addressing your file servers, as Mike talked about? Could you be using cloud-based solutions? Your security, you're going to have to think about in terms of your processes, your procedures. What's that going to mean? And then, who's responsible? If something breaks, something happens to one of those personal devices, is the school district going to be taking care of those? Most likely not, but you want to put that up front. You want to put that in writing and make sure that that's clear and everyone understands. You heard Mike talk about the pilot program in the library. I think it's a great example. You want to really think about where's the best place to start. Where are you going to have the greatest success? You want to start small and be successful. Find the pioneers, the people who are willing to take those risks, and let them become your first group, and then grow from that. You want to find partners. It's really very, very important to think about who's going to be working with you to make this successful. There are many companies that will sell you products, but you want to find a partner who understands education and specializes in the management of technology. You want to find a partner who's not just a vendor, but someone who will match your needs and your budget to a solution that will help you manage this type of a project. And think about it in educational terms, in terms of teaching and learning. You want to look at other schools and organizations. You've heard from Mike today in terms of Hempfield. There are probably others near you that you might want to turn to. Reach out for help. Over the years, I often collaborated with neighboring school districts. I was located next to a school district named Shaler, and we often would work together trying to find ways that we could help solve each other's problems. It's critical to have that sense of collaboration. Look at your neighboring districts. Also think about the regional providers. There may be an intermediate unit or a BOCE or some organization that has a lot of expertise that can help you and will have the kinds of resources that Mike shared with you as well. And don't forget about higher education when you think about BYOD. Here in K through 12, it's only been the last few years that we've really come on board. But if you think about colleges and universities, they have been allowing their students to bring their own devices for many years. They have much more experience. They've been able to deal with this. They know how to handle it from technically as well as in terms of the human side. I remember when I was at the Fox Chapel Area School District, I was really fortunate that I had a strong relationship with Carnegie Mellon University. I'm an adjunct faculty member there, and I know the person who's the Chief Information Officer. When I needed to get help in terms of redesigning of my network, my wireless infrastructure, I was able to get the help of one of the engineers from Carnegie Mellon. You probably have a higher education institution nearby. They want to help schools. Go to them. Take advantage of the fact that they've been out there doing this for many years before K through 12 started. Then you need to think about, how are you going to measure your success? People are going to be asking, especially your board, some of your parents, wanting to know, what difference did this make? What are you going to be able to tell them? What are you going to be looking for? There's some examples here you may want to be thinking about. I think it's really important as, from my point of view, as I started thinking about those 4 C's. Are you better preparing the kids for their career and college readiness? Are you giving them the skills so that they're going to be successful? Can you come up with a way so that you can see how this could make a difference? But you want to have a reason why you're doing this. It should be part of a plan. It's really critical that this all fits together. So when we talk about the pieces fitting together, what we're looking at is not just technology. We're thinking about the curriculum and instruction. We're looking at in terms of the IT infrastructure. And we're talking about the training and professional development. All these are gears that mesh together. And we want to make sure that we address all of these and make sure that we're prepared and moving at a pace that's going to work and make this successful like Hempfield. You want to look at your existing IT systems. You heard Mike talk about the fact that he had basically an infrastructure that was not designed to be enterprise. He had to make a switch to move in that direction. You're going to need to think about that storage capacity unless you're moving to the cloud. You're going to need to think about how are you going to be managing those personal devices, or you come up with a plan like Mike shared with you so that the management is not a major issue. You want to think about who's going to be helping when there's a problem. Could you use your students to become part of your help desk? Could you empower them so that they can help to solve your problems? That's what you want to be thinking about. And then the last thing you really want to be doing is making sure you don't fall into that technology graveyard where you're just doing it because it's the latest fad, the latest thing to do. I remember when I bought my first Apple Newton. It had a lot of great things to it, but it didn't last very long. I had a netbook for about a year. It's gone. So you want to be thinking in terms of where you're going. But if you start with teaching and learning and the impact upon your students and your staff, you're going to be in the right direction. We're going to kind of conclude now with some final thoughts from Mike, because I think he's really given you some great advice, great information, and just to share with you in terms of the success story of what's happened at Hempfield. Mike, do you want to explain and just kind of wrap up?
Yeah, sure. I mean, my quote's there on the screen. I think that really sums it up well. You know, like I said, we didn't really go into this planning for it to take over and replace all of our, you know, CFF equipment and things like that. But I think what it did kind of accomplish, and that I'm very happy with, it makes things a lot easier going forward, is really changing the culture of the staff at our high school. With the students already know that this is kind of the future, they're already living it, but for many of our staff, it was a bit of a shift, knowing that students were going to have a personal device of some sort in there, some kind of, you know, small electronic internet-enabled device. And you know, right now we're kind of looking at where we go, whether we do a one-to-one thing. We're kind of leaning towards tablets, but that's still up in the air. But because we started with this project, you know, 3 years ago, our staff has kind of grown accustomed to seeing students with devices and realizing that it's not the end of the world, that the system isn't going to fall apart by the students having them there. And I think when we actually get to implementing some kind of one-to-one device, whether the district provides it or it's a mix of the district providing it and students bringing their own, it'll be a whole lot easier to move forward.
Well, Mike, I really thank you for all the time you've given. And there's some questions that have come up that I hope you'll help answer, because one of these evidently came out of the wiki that you were talking about. And we have a question from Lindsay Myers about the rental program that you were talking about. Could you tell us a little bit about that? You haven't mentioned anything about that up till now.
The rental program. Yeah, that's actually something new. The wiki that's there was actually from a Pete and C presentation I did last year, maybe the year before. The laptop rental program is something new we started this year. We simultaneously launched an online education program within our district for kids that wanted to take a couple classes here and there online, as opposed to you know, the standard traditional setting. And so along with that, we launched a laptop rental program where students, whether they were taking online courses or not, could rent a laptop from the district. We've primarily used some older 5-6 year old MacBooks that are coming out of the laptop carts that we would have otherwise probably been recycling or just keeping in reserve. But we had the hardware available and decided that it would do some good if we could get it out there to some students who otherwise didn't have the hardware. And it's been a reasonably successful program. I mean, we haven't had a huge sign up for it, but at the same time, the ones that have been signing up are a lot of your economically disadvantaged students who otherwise probably wouldn't get anything at home, or there's only one computer in a household of, you know, 5 or 6, and it's kind of tough to get access to a computer. And so in that regard, even if we're not leasing or renting tons of computers, it hasn't been a moneymaker. We're still getting the technology out there for students to use.
Well, thanks. Another question that you may be able to help with, Mike, is Lindsay Myers also was talking about the fact that they're seeing most of their students aren't bringing in laptops. They're bringing in iPods, iPhones, and maybe an iPad.
Yes.
Is that what you're seeing, and how do you address that?
If you're on the wiki, I forget what page it is. I think it's the usage stats page. We've seen exactly the same thing. If you look on there, I think towards the bottom, at least 90 plus, if not more percent, of all the devices that are coming in are mobile, whether it's iOS or Android. We even have some Nintendo DS users there that pop up from time to time. But yeah, we have very few laptops. I'd say there's probably less than 30 students, if that, out of 2,200 that bring a laptop on a regular basis. It is what it is. Going into the program, we really didn't know what percentage of students would be bringing a laptop. And it's kind of interesting. You talked about talking with parents earlier. We did get feedback from parents, and one of the things that was brought up was that even if the parent has purchased a laptop for their kid to use, there was a lot of hesitation sending that laptop into school, where there's far less hesitation sending in a $200 or $300 mobile device. So which I think is part of the reason that we're not seeing as many laptops. Just because parents are, still somewhat afraid that laptop, and rightly so, afraid that laptop may end up getting broken or stolen.
Well, Mike, thanks so
Mike.
very much. You really made this come alive with sharing. And we're going to let Jeff Main take over, and we're going to be wrapping up. And I'd like to thank our audience. I've really enjoyed the opportunity to share with you. And Jeff, take over from now.
Yeah, real quick, Mike, I just wanted to ask you one thing. I think another issue with the laptops was probably power, right? Most of the classrooms just don't have power anywhere near for those type of one-to-one initiatives. So do you think power has been a limitation of any of that type of device?
I don't think it's been too much of a hindrance for students. I mean, we have talked with some of the students that are there that are bringing a laptop in. Power wasn't a huge concern for them. I mean, they're not using that laptop continuously all day in the same way you would see it with a one-to-one program. Where power has been an issue is in our planning to do a district-provided one-to-one. We've kind of recognized that a traditional laptop is not going to have the battery life to last the whole day, which is why we've really been focusing on some kind of tablet or other very slim mobile device.
Gotcha.
But yeah, power is definitely a problem, and it's not one that we can overcome the same way we could overcome by putting in a new wireless system, for network access. Power is a major renovation of the building, which we kind of have to come up with another solution. We can't really fix that.
Well, Mike, on behalf of everybody at QuestTech, we want to thank you for being involved. That just really upped the value of this presentation, webinar, no matter how much work we did on the back end and how much time having you in your real-world experience. We have another webinar on 12/12. So if any of you attendees that really enjoyed this, there will be emails going out after we hit the Ohio show this week in Columbus. And then I think we have a national show in San Diego. So there'll be a series of webinars. If you know anybody or if you really enjoyed it, you can send them an invite, and they'll be running. And I'd like to thank Norton. Norton, you did a wonderful job, and the rest of the QuestTech crew. And we'd like to thank everybody for taking the time today. Everybody hung in there. We had a lot of people that stayed the entire length, and we're 2 minutes short to 60 minutes. We were right on target, so Norton, good job. We'll be sending out an email to everybody with the 10 steps. And we have another chat to get a copy of the presentation, which we'll be able to send out. That'll be no problem from Tammy. So we'll get a hold of you and get that after the webinar. We'll be sending that presentation out to anybody that wants that. We'll be also sending out a 10-step PDF. It's kind of a little quick guide that we put together, outlining how you'd want to get started based on some of the things we talked about today. And the chat logs are saved on your screen right now. So before you exit out, you can copy and paste the chat log. Kylie did a great job to include every link possible talked about today in the conference. She was pretty active on that. And again, I'd like to thank everybody else. And hopefully you enjoyed this. We're going to try to keep all of these as kind of more thought leader versus product-based, vendor-based presentations. So expect to see many more of these on different topics going forward as we get better and better at delivering these, not from a vendor standpoint or a product standpoint, but kind of around how it's actually used in school. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day.